Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Maquis, which is episode 20 and episode 21 of season 2 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So this video is a part of a series of videos where I cover episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my DS9, my latest DS9 user poll, is the Maquis. So the Maquis is a two-part episode where a Cardassain ship is blown up, and Sisko investigates and finds that it was in fact Federation citizens who have done it. He reconnects with his old friend Cal Hudson, who is the liaison to the demilitarized zone, which features a group of Federation planets that ended up in Cardassian space, and there's some Cardassian planets that ended up in Federation space, and there trouble is brewing, and that's apparently where these terrorists came from. They eventually form a terrorist group known as the Maquis, whose aim is to get rid of the Cardassians from the demilitarized zone, and the Cardassians, for their part, are arming their own citizens in the demilitarized zone, fueling the conflict. Sisko is pressured by Starfleet to find a peace between the two sides. However, he finds that his friend Cal Hudson is in fact the leader and founder of the Maquis, and he refuses to negotiate and is only interested in what he refers to as retaliation. And so Sisko then teams up with Gul Dukat, and they stop the arms shipments from the Cardassians into the demilitarized zone, and then they stop the Maquis from attacking a Cardassian depot in order to de-escalate the situation. So everything seems okay. He calmed everything down. He avoided war, but as he pointed out to Major Kira, they probably just delayed war because the situation in the demilitarized zone remains hostile. So this is a two-part episode, obviously. I don't know if I mentioned that. So, like pretty much every episode of Deep Space Nine, I saw it when it first aired. I think there's like maybe one or two or maybe 3 or 4 episodes in like season 5, 6, or 7 I didn't see because I just missed it because I was out like getting stoned or whatnot. But most, especially the earlier seasons, the first 4 seasons, I never missed an episode. I watched every single one religiously, recorded it, watched it again and again. Although I think I dropped off of recording the episodes sometime in season 4. I only got like the first part of season 4, then I dropped off, and that's when I came a bit iffy. But anyway, that's my own personal story. So I remember seeing this episode and being introduced to the concept of the Maquis. And I was like, oh, so they were introduced in this episode in Deep Space Nine. Now, they were preambled in the Next Gen episode, Journey's End. I almost said Journey to Babel. That's a totally different episode. No, Journey's End. The episode where Wesley is a whiny emo bitch and decides to run off with the Traveler. Yeah, I'll get there. I really don't like that episode, or at least the Wesley part of it. The demilitarized zone part of it was interesting. So that introduced the concept of the demilitarized zone, and some planets going to the Cardassains, some planets going to the Federation. This introduces kind of a sequel to it, where it introduces the formation of the Maquis, the terrorist group. Now, something I was not aware of until, I want to say, like 4 or 5 years ago, somewhat relatively recently, was that the Maquis were invented for Voyager, and these episodes in TNG and DS9 that came out the year before were created specifically to preamble Voyager. Now, I did never guess that because the Maquis didn't seem like a Voyager like thing. It always felt like a DS9 thing, and I think part of that is because it was introduced in this show. But plus, DS9 actually did more with the Maquis than Voyager did, and that's the whole problem with Voyager, because it seemed like they wanted to... So let's backtrack a bit. Got to talk about the formation of the shows. So there's the original series, and then there was Next Generation. Next Generation was Roddenberry's vision of the perfect utopian future, even more so than the original series. It was his main thing. I talked about this in a lot of episode reviews, particularly in the first 3 seasons when Roddenberry was still heavily involved, that he shot down a lot of scripts. He had this thing called the Roddenberry Box, where he would say some ridiculous shit like people don't mourn the deaths of loved ones in the future, or there are no lawyers in the perfect future. So he would say some really stupid shit. And rightfully or wrongfully, after he got too sick to be involved in Star Trek and then eventually would pass away, they moved away from that Roddenberry Box. Now, Rick Berman and Michael Piller, particularly Rick Berman, would maintain a version of the Roddenberry Box all the way up to the end, but that box got a lot weaker, but it was still there. So their workaround, because there are a lot of problems that the writers kept hitting a brick wall into TNG, was the Roddenberry Box. The main aspect of it was that just should be no personal conflicts within the characters, because the characters are in a perfect society and they're perfect human beings, so they shouldn't be fighting amongst themselves, which is very antithetical to drama, because drama and interesting storytelling is born out of conflict. So many writers got too frustrated with those constraints and thought it was ridiculous and quit, or got fired, or refused to work within those boundaries. And so the workaround of that particular aspect of the Roddenberry Box of not wanting conflict was, they're aliens. Because the human or the Federation society is a perfect utopian society, but they could meet some aliens that are not so perfect, and so they have conflicts with them. And so that's why there's always a lot of aliens, and all the main enemies are aliens. And so Deep Space Nine got around that constraints with the original premise of the show by making the cast made up of Federation citizens or Starfleet officers and an alien race known as the Bajorans, and that also included like Odo, who's the shape-shifting alien from who knows where. And so therefore you can have conflict within. It's the workaround of having conflict within the main characters, so that it circumvents the Roddenberry Box by saying, okay, it's not just Starfleet. Starfleet is working with these Bajorans who just came out of this brutal occupation, and their religion drives them, and their government's falling apart, and it's very new and volatile, and so there's going to be a lot of butting of the heads, so they could do that and not worry about and sort of circumvent the Roddenberry Box, because they have excuses of why there's conflict. So when they're coming up with the idea of Voyager, and this is something I talked a lot about in my reviews for Voyager, they wanted to do the same thing, which I think is lazy, but they wanted a workaround with the Roddenberry Box. So because if they just made it a group of Starfleet officers who are on a Federation starship, then they would have to deal with the no conflict Roddenberry Box rule. I mean, they didn't have to. They could always just ignore it like Modern Trek does. But, and to be fair, DS9 and Voyager would kind of ignore it in the later years as well. But they wanted to. They wanted to stick to the Roddenberry Box. So they, like DS9, they wanted to do a workaround. And their workaround was to introduce a group of Federation terrorists Federation citizens who were terrorists. Therefore, they rejected the perfect society, and they rejected Federation society, and they were active terrorists, and so they would be on Voyager, and so they would conflict with the Starfleet crew, and therefore you could have conflict. Now, this is all long, but anyway, sorry I'm getting off topic, but I think it's relevant because they actually 86'd that idea almost immediately. Like in this, again, this is something I talked about in my review of Caretaker and other episode reviews of Voyager, is that they immediately put the Maquis crew members in Starfleet uniforms by the end of the very first episode. Or second episode if you consider Caretaker a two-parter, but really it's a 1 2-hour episode. But anyway, by the end of that episode, they're in Starfleet uniforms. And so the fact that they're Maquis actually becomes irrelevant very, very fast. Now they try, especially in the first season, they try to work it into the story like in this first couple episodes, Chakotay is a bit hostile to some of the Starfleet people like Tuvok, and B'Elanna is very hostile and will argue with the Starfleet officers throughout season 1. And then you have some members at the end of the Maquis at the end of season 1 who aren't integrating into the Starfleet crew very well. But it's not that big of a presence. It's just kind of a minor reoccurring background thing that happens every once in a blue moon within the first season. And in the second season, it's touched on a little bit again, but even less. You have characters like, Sisko turns out the big Cardassian spy, which I don't know, doesn't really have to do with the Maquis, and you have Hogan and other characters who are like pushing Chakotay to do Maquis stuff, or this one guy, Maquis member, who even what's the word I'm looking? Defects to the Kazon. But those are very, very minor points that don't drive the show and don't really come up very much in season 2. And then by the time we get to season 3, the Maquis is not even a thing. It's completely forgotten. Just brought it up every once in a while, like the episode Worst Case Scenario at the end of season 3. They bring up, this holodeck program, harkening back to when the Maquis first joined the crew of the Maquis staging a mutiny. And as mentioned, it's thrown out there every once in a while, and eventually, in season 4 and 5, the Maquis crew members on Voyager hear about, spoilers, the destruction of the Maquis, which happened in DS9 in their season 5, and so they deal with that a bit. So it's brought up again, and there's just totally irrelevant episode in season 7 about this Maquis Bajoran guy telepathically linking, but the with Tuvok to try to reform the Maquis. But the less said about that episode, the better. Point is, the Maquis barely appeared in Voyager. I think of them as a DS9 thing, because you got this episode that's two-parter, which stands out. You have, towards the end of the season, O'Brien's accused of being a Maquis terrorist and put on trial, and it was the Cardassains' way to try to discredit the Maquis. In season 3, you got Thomas Riker comes on board to DS9 to steal the Defiant because he's with the Maquis. And then I think they're not touched again until season 4, when the recurring character of Eddington is discovered to be a Maquis infiltrator, and he takes over Deep Space Nine and uses the fact that Sisko's girlfriend is smuggling medical supplies for the Maquis, uses that as a distraction in order to hijack a shipment of aid going to Cardassia. And then in season 5, they deal with Sisko being like, "Oh, you betrayed your uniform," and going after Eddington and getting him back and arresting him. And then at the end of season 5, the Cardassia joins the Dominion, so they wipe out the Maquis, and that's the end of it. Again, spoilers, but you would have seen all that, I'm assuming. If not, I'm sorry. You should be more careful when watching these reviews. But anyway, so it's more of a Deep Space Nine thing. Even though they didn't appear that much, they were definitely, when they did, they were front and center. And Voyager was just like, even in the first two seasons, especially the second season, it was more just like a line of dialogue. Oh, yeah, but us are Maquis or whatever. And it didn't play an important factor. So that all this was a very, very long roundabout way of explaining why it surprised me to learn that the Maquis were invented for Voyager, and that these episodes, this one, the Maquis Parts 1, 2, and Journey's End, and Preemptive Strike, were made to set up Voyager. It never occurred to me that would be the case, because from my perspective, seeing this episode and then seeing Preemptive Strike, and then nearly a year later, after TNG finishes season 7, all good things, and then come out with Generations, and then DS9 finishes season 2, and it has the start of season 3. With all this stuff with the Thomas Riker being the Maquis and all this, and then they come out with Voyager. So by the time Voyager is released, I'm thinking, it seems to me that they thought, oh, the Maquis in Deep Space Nine, that's an interesting invention. Let's use them to put some of those characters in Voyager to spice it up. But that's me not realizing how far in advance TV shows have to be made, particularly if you're creating a whole show and creating a pilot and creating the premise to it and coming up with the ideas that this happens far, far in advance. And so, this is me being naive and not realizing that when this episode came out, they had already started creating Voyager. Which, by the way, this is the busiest time in the Star Trek franchise. Well, at least the 90s era. I don't know about the modern era, if that's busier, because they were working on, they were wrapping up Next Generation, including coming up with the season finale, series finale, I should say. They were doing Deep Space Nine, coming up with the idea of the Dominion, and Generations, the first Next Generation cast film, was coming out, and they were doing Voyager in the setup for Voyager, and I didn't realize that all of this was going on at the same time. So it was a very hectic time, and that's why if you look at the writing credit for these two-parters, it will say story by, and it will have all of the showrunners, the show creators, Jerry Taylor, Rick Berman, and Michael Piller, because they have the story by credits, not the written by. But they came up with the story because this was a vehicle to release the Maquis to set up for Voyager, which, again, the Maquis just feel more like they feel like they fit more in home with the tone of Deep Space Nine, because Deep Space Nine is a lot more darker and has something to do with conflict and sort of the negative side of the Federation. And so my brain just can't think of this as a Voyager thing, because I feel like it never was. It was always a Deep Space Nine thing. Voyager just borrowed them for a while, so it's just does not compute that they were invented for Voyager. Anyway, so getting into this episode in particular, I remember watching, before Voyager came out, watching this special on TV that was celebrating sci-fi, I think specifically sci-fi shows on television. It would start with Lost in Space and the original series Star Trek in the 60s, and some Twilight Zone and stuff like that, and it would go up through the years, the Battlestar Galactica in the 70s, and then Quantum Leap in the 80s, and all the other stuff. And then when it got to the late 80s, we finally get to Next Generation, and then when it got to the 90s, it got to Babylon 5, and then Deep Space Nine. And why I'm saying this is because I remember the segment they did for Deep Space Nine was really short. It was shorter than Babylon 5, which disappointed me. Definitely shorter than Next Generation. But what was unique and what stuck out to me in this segment about Deep Space Nine focused entirely on this episode, on these two-parter, the Maquis. And again, that to me, that solidified more that the Maquis was the DS9 thing. But and mind you, it came out before season 3 of DS9 came out. So at the time, there was only the first 2 seasons of DS9. So that's why they wouldn't focus on the Dominion, because it wasn't really a thing yet. But I still disagreed. I remember disagreeing strongly with them choosing the Maquis, these episodes to focus on, because, and that's when I realized that I didn't like these episodes that much. That's when it first occurred to me that maybe these episodes were a bit overrated, because I felt like the DS9, even in its first 2 seasons, had done a lot better things, like Duet and Whispers, which were my favorite episodes. And just focusing more on the Cardassian Bajoran conflict, that seemed to me would make a lot more sense than focusing on the Maquis. So that always felt like a very odd choice for me. And so, yeah, I never hated these episodes, to be clear, but I didn't think they were great. And as we go forward through the decades of my adult life, and I started hearing, watching these reviews and reading these reviews on these two-parters with people who loved them and thought they were really great, I started to articulate more why I disagreed with them. When they articulated why they liked it, it made me realize where I disagreed with them and why I didn't like it all that much. And the heart of my complaint with this two-parter is it portrays the Maquis as wimps, as patsies, as morons, as, this is the Federation trying to be renegades and they fucking suck at it. Now, I have an idea that this was Ira Steven Behr's input, who wrote part 2 of this. I don't think he was technically the showrunner of DS9 yet, but they knew he was going to be. He was already ordained. In fact, when they brought him on at the very beginning of season 1, it was with the promise that he would become the showrunner once Michael Piller left to do Voyager, which would happen pretty much around this time, actually. And so Ira Steven Behr kind of took over as showrunner here, but it really would become the showrunner in season 3, and so you would get a more sort of darker tone. Now, DS9 is my favorite Star Trek show, and I've been vocal about that before. It's very close with TNG. I just like it slightly better than TNG. But, and Ira Steven Behr was the showrunner of Deep Space Nine, which is my favorite Star Trek show. In fact, maybe my favorite science fiction show. Maybe The Expanse might beat it out now, but a while back when I did my top 10 favorite science fiction shows, this was number 1. I think The Expanse might beat it out now, but that's another question, Regardless, it's one of my favorite shows of all time, and my favorite Star Trek show. And Ira Steven Behr was the showrunner. But there's a lot about his style that I don't like. Just because he was the showrunner for my favorite show doesn't mean I agreed with everything he did. Vic Fontaine! Excuse me. It's funny, I was watching an interview with Ira Steven Behr, and he was like, yeah, I love Vic Fontaine. Some people actually hate them, and I say, screw them, I do what I want. And my instinct was like, yeah, do what you want. But I was like, wait a second. But Vic Fontaine does suck. So you're actually wrong. I mean, sure, you can do what you want, but you're wrong, and you just make the show worse. But that's your decision to do that, I guess. But Ira Steven Behr, and why I'm bringing it up here, because I can see a lot of his touch in this portrayal of the Maquis, because he actively, and one of the things I disagreed with very strongly with him that he would reinforce, is that Roddenberry vision for a perfect future that I was talking about. I believe in that. That's one of the things I love about Star Trek, and I totally think it's possible, and I think that if the way you're going to do it, you have to eliminate the monetary system, at least has its envisioned today, at the very least, you could have some other version of it, but definitely not operate the way it does now. And that's part of Roddenberry's vision. And also his vision of utopian future. Now, I think he said it way too early. It shouldn't be the 24th century. It should be more like the 30th century or 32nd. But whatever. That's nitpicking. Point is, I agree and I love Roddenberry's vision of the future, of this utopian future. Ira Steven Behr does not. He actively disagrees with it, and he often will try to poke holes at it, and that's why he's invented Section 31, which I was okay with. It didn't dent me too much, but it seemed to go along with his opinion that there's always a dark side to every society, that no society could be perfect without these evil people doing things, which I disagree with. I think the Federation would have been just fine without Section 31. They only made things worse. But that's my opinion. That's a topic for another time. But it just illustrates how I disagreed with Ira Steven Behr. And that's only just one example of many examples of him infusing this not believing and kind of actively putting down or making fun of Roddenberry's vision, which, to be fair, a lot of modern Star Trek shows just almost ignore it outright, particularly Picard. But again, that's another topic. They play lip service to it, but they don't actually portray it because they want that conflict. See, their workaround, a lot of modern Trek, particularly Picard, their workaround of the Roddenberry Box is to just ignore it outright. Whereas, at least DS9 and Voyager, they would make up bullshit workarounds. But anyway, Lower Decks, I think, is pretty good at staying to the Roddenberry Box most of the time. And probably Strange New Worlds as well. But Discovery is very iffy, and Picard flat out sucked at it. But then again, I'm getting off topic here. And Prodigy is just not sticking to canon at all. They're just doing whatever the fuck they want, so I don't even know. But anyway, God, where the fuck was that? Oh, so Ira Steven Behr. I can see the way that the Maquis portrayed in this episode as being pansy ass, and it almost seems like he's agreeing with Gul Dukat and the Cardassains. Now, it does portray Gul Dukat as sorry, it's my cat's dinner time. They started bothering me, but it's still 20 minutes away. Anyway, sorry, they don't have any internal clocks. Anyway, so yeah, it almost seems like this two-parter is saying Dukat is right. Like, for example, the part where he's being tortured and he's trying to be a Vulcan's trying to do a mind meld, but he has like this great Cardassian mind control, and he's like mocking the Maquis, and it's like, oh, you think you're renegades? Anyone can blow up a ship. And then when Sisko and all, show up to rescue Dukat's like, why the fuck are you talking to them? Just shoot them! And then later, when they're trying to stop the shipments of Cardassian weapons into the demilitarized zone, Sisko is like trying to negotiate, like, look, we're going to board your ship, blah, blah, blah. And the guy's, being indigent, and like, you come on board this ship. And then Dukat shows up and it's like, I am the Dukat of the First Order. I'm going to destroy your ship in 10 seconds. And he starts counting, and the guy flees out and is like, stop counting. And then, so they able to stop the shipment. And Dukat smirks and he smiles. And see how you get things done. And Kira looks at him like she's all pissed off, and he just smirks to himself. Oh, I'm so awesome. So it almost seems like the episode's saying the Cardassians are more effective than the Federation, and they get things done because they have no scruples. And also, definitely is portraying the Maquis as ineffective idiots who are too soft. It's almost like it was written by a Klingon. These humans are too soft. and when they try to become violent and renegades, they don't know what the fuck they're doing, and they suck at it. Which, by the way, is not how the Maquis are portrayed in Voyager, but that's a topic for another time. But anyway, the episode ends with Sisko letting Cardassains go away, and because he's his good friend, he doesn't want to kill his good friend, and Dukat screams, he's like, no, fire! And Sisko has to push him, shove him back down in his seat, and he's like, I thought you were strong, Commander, but you're weak. And Sisko's like, yeah, whatever, I don't give a shit. So you could argue that the episode is saying, even though the Cardassains are more effective and better at what they do, that they're still brutal, militaristic, live in a dictatorship, and they're assholes who are brutal, and so it's better to have the higher ground, but they're going to be better at military shit because they're just better at it because they have no scruples. Which I'm not too opposed to that, but I don't know. First of all, let me really touch on this whole Maquis being pansies. That I am totally 100% against. I think that does not compute at all. I totally 100% disagree with that. Particularly when I was thinking about the scene where, I can't remember what her name was, but the Vulcan who was in the Maquis where she was trying to mind meld with Dukat, and Dukat was like, I can block your thing. I call bullshit on that for one. I don't care how well-trained Cardassian children are. They can't fucking block a Vulcan mind meld. Come on. That's fucking stupid. I guess you could say, well, it's all magic, BS, psychic stuff anyway, but I really find that hard to believe the way the Vulcan mind melds have been established in the show. Okay, that's number one, but let me grant them that. Okay, let's grant them that. Okay, fine. The Cardassians can resist Vulcan mind melds. As stupid as I think that is, let's grant them that. They can do it. Vulcans are fucking brutal. They have super strength. They're emotionless, they got no logic to hold them back. Particularly when I'm thinking of portrayal in Enterprise, or even Mirror in the original series. Vulcans are fucking brutal. So I don't buy that this Vulcan would be a pansy who doesn't know what they're doing, and she's like, well, we would not stoop ourselves to cut. No, if she wanted to be fucking brutal, she would be fucking brutal. She would fucking brutalize this fucker, do a reach inside his mind and rip it apart. I don't buy this bull, and especially if she's a renegade who's saying fuck the Federation and fuck these Cardassians. She could seriously fuck him up if she wanted to. And so yeah, I call bullshit on that. Also, there's a fucking Klingon in the Maquis. You see in the Maquis, there's a Klingon woman. She's a fucking pansy. You're gonna tell me a Klingon is working with a bunch of pansies? Fuck no. That's bullshit. Thirdly, it has trained Starfleet officers like Cal Hudson, and we will later learn Chakotay, and Roland will eventually, again, spoilers, join the Maquis. These are badass, trained Starfleet elites who've been in battle, who know how to do battle, and they are leading this movement. And then even later still, is Eddington. They're not fucking pansies. Now, you could say, oh, well, maybe they're skilled, but the people that work underneath them aren't. Well, they're their leaders. And, you see badasses like B'Elanna Torres in that light. That's why I mentioned that Voyager didn't portray them as pansies. It's just this episode. And so, I don't buy what this episode is trying to sell me. I don't, and that's particularly, and I think this is when the two-parter lost me entirely, was with those scenes with Dukat on the planet, and then towards the end where you had these runabouts attacking these dinky ships, and they were going boo, boo, boo. It was a really, really boring battle sequence, and honestly, I didn't feel the stakes, because they stopped the Maquis from attacking this depot. So what? Like, they're still there. They're still around. Like, from the way the episodes were being developed. And again, this is not me having any knowledge of Voyager or whatnot. It seemed to me that the stakes were to end the Maquis. In fact, Quark even has that conversation with the Vulcan in the brig about how peace is at an all-time low. So it seems like they should be able to come to an agreement. But they don't. And so that felt like really like it didn't have a conclusion. And I know they need to keep the Maquis going, but they set the episodes up so that it felt like the only way to resolve it was by ending the Maquis. So they shouldn't have done that. If they wanted to keep the Maquis going, they shouldn't have constructed the episode the way they did. So those were my main complaints in this episode. I didn't like Dukat in this episode. You know, I've been watching other reviews of saying, oh, they really like Dukat in this episode, but I didn't really like him in this episode. I didn't like how he was supposed to be more efficient and better at doing things. I think that was actual bullshit. I think Starfleet would be better at it. Just because you're brutal doesn't mean you're more effective. And some of the conversations he was having with Sisko about, oh, I memorized those controls before I came on board. Shut the fuck up, Dukat. No one wants to hear that shit. I don't want to hear him being all smug like that. I'm not interested in that. Because it does portray Starfleet as useless. And they're not. And again, this is why I'm blaming R. Stephen Barron. Because he has a big grudge against the Federation and Starfleet overall and doesn't think they're effective. And if you ever saw his pitch for season 8, the fictional season 8 of DS9 that he did in that documentary, it really shows how much disrespect that he God damn it that he stop it how much disrespect that he has for Roddenberry's vision. So, a couple other things I wanted to point out about these two-parters. Kyle Hudson, I kept expecting him to, come up on when he first came up in the, what do they call it, turbolift, whatever they call it in Deep Space Nine. He came up to ops and he walked out. I was expecting, this group of musicians playing music, and musical instruments to walk behind him, and then Sisko to be like, who are they? And he would say, that's my theme music. Any good hero should have it. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then you've probably never seen the movie I'm Gonna Get You, Sucker, which is a hilarious movie. I think it came out in the early 90s, like 1990 or something. It was a parody spoof film done by, it's making fun of blaxploitation films of the 70s. It was done by what they called, the Wayne brothers. Kiefer Iron Waynes was starred in it, and I think he was produced it. It was one of the parodies actually used to be good before, not the scary movie bullshit when they turned crap. But it was starring the same actor who plays Cal Hudson, and so every time I see it, I think of that movie, and I thought he'd do the joke about my theme music. And it was, I don't know. Also, kind of annoyed me the way they introduced him as being good friends with Benjamin and Jadzia. Is like, hey, and Benjamin like, that's Dax. Oh my God, that's Dax. Oh, you remember going to the German festival where you're wearing lederhosen? I know this is a common thing, and a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me, but I hate it when shows do that. I hate it when shows try to cheat and create a backstory off screen and pretend like, oh, well, they're good friends, they love each other, and don't really earn it. Like, even if, okay, I can accept that Benjamin and Sisko would know people outside of what we saw on screen. That's only logical. And that he would have good friends or whatever people he went to the academy with. But you need to earn it. You can't just say, oh, this is an old good friend, and expect us to accept him immediately as a main character as definitely a good friend. you need to introduce the audience to that. Even if the characters in universe are already good friends, you need to make the audience accept this. Which, I'm thinking of one example that does this really well is the episode Tapestry, where Picard goes back in time to his good friends, Marta and whatever this face guy. And you know that they're Picard's good friends, but they earn the fact that they're good friends. You can see the reactions. They're just not like pop out of nowhere and be like, hey, we're good friends and now we're going to fuck off. They did try to earn it in this episode, to be fair, with all them, him talking about, like, oh, how's Jake doing and all that. But I don't know. I think they might have just did it a bit too fast for me. And maybe this is me being stupid, but so we'll leave that aside. But they didn't do much more to earn it after that. They kind of, after that one scene, we were supposed to be given that they were best buddies when they didn't really develop that even further. So I don't think that one scene was good enough. I didn't really find it interesting either, to him going like, oh, are you and Dax the thing? And he's like, oh, no. Like, I don't know. I was so detached from their friendship that, yeah, because I just don't think they handled it very well. But again, maybe that's, I know that a lot of people are going to disagree with me, so maybe that's just me being silly and unrealistic, but that's how I felt. Can't help it. And another interesting scene that I thought, something I took note of this time around, was when Kira came in to yell, and part one, she came into Sisko's office to yell at him for about what the hell's going on with the Maquis, and Sisko's treating them like they're a bunch of idiots who are just want violence and they need to calm the fuck down. And Kira is arguing that Starfleet's abandoned them and is not going to help them at all and is just going to leave them to the mercy of the Cardassains. And Sisko's like, they chose to stay there. And Kira yells back, well, I didn't. And I lived with them for 26 years. Every Bajoran lived with them. I know what those colonists are going through. And what I really liked about that scene is right after she said that, Sisko didn't say anything. He just pressed the button that opened the door to his office. That's a really subtle touch that I never really paid attention to before, but I actually love that. I love that he didn't yell back. He wasn't like, get out, or like, that will be, you're dismissed, Major, or anything like that. He simply opened the door. And it's kind of his way of saying, get the fuck out. But without actually saying it, with just pressing the button to open it. I think that I was really impressed with that. I thought that was a nice little touch because Sisko was obviously really pissed off with what she was saying. But then in part two, when she came in his office, she was actually agreeing with him because we get another appearance of the worst admiral in Starfleet, Admiral Nechayev, who I've heard someone else describe, she's a hard ass and she's not very pleasant to be around, but she gets the job done and she's a good admiral. Which I talked about in other videos I've done, particularly my Jellicoe video, because she's involved with forcing Jellicoe upon the Enterprise crew when he's a terrible fucking captain. She nearly ruined the entire mission by doing that. And I concluded she's a terrible admiral. Anyway, I don't mind her attitude. I don't mind that she's curt with people. In fact, later Picard would butter her up, and actually it was before this because it was Journey's End, but he would butter her up and give her tea and biscuits and whatnot, and she's being polite and nice. That's fine. Doesn't change the fact she's a terrible admiral. Her attitude or her being curt has nothing to do why she's a bad admiral. She's a bad admiral because she's a bad admiral. She makes bad decisions. She thrusts Jellicoe in the ship that shouldn't have it when she should have given the command to Riker. She yells at Picard for having a conscience and not committing genocide against the Borg. And here, she's continuing the trend of being a terrible admiral, of dismissing the Maquis out of hand, being like, oh, they're just a bunch of stupid hotheads. Just go talk to them and work it out. And I love how as soon as she left Sisko's office, he's like, work it out? What the hell does she think I'm trying to do? And then Kira steps in and he vents on Kira and starts yelling. It's like, blah, why do they think those stupid people on Earth, they think the Maquis is nothing, blah, blah, blah. And you get the, classic speech where he says, what does he say? Something like, oh yeah, the problem is Earth. The problem is they're all saints on Earth. And, but out there, not everyone's saint. Not there. There are no saints. They're just people, and people who are scared, and they react. And these people on the Federation, Starfleet officers, are so disconnected from reality because they live in paradise, and these border colonies or whatever aren't paradise. And again, I gotta call out the old Irish Stephen Bear again for portraying Starfleet in a negative manner, in a manner that I don't agree with. So I don't like this. I don't like the fact that Nechayev is such a fucking terrible admiral. I like it better in season 6 when we get Admiral Ross. Despite his working with Section 31, was a good admiral. So, yeah, and someone said, oh, she's not the evil admiral trope. No, she's not. She's the stupid admiral trope. The bad admiral trope. Which is just as prevalent as the evil admiral trope. But anyway. God, she sucks. But anyway, so Sisko vents and yells at Kira, and Kira's like, I agree with you 100%. If you want to, the legate, what's his face, is Parn, I think his name was, you want to give that same speech to him, go ahead. And she's like, I just might. That was a nice moment. I did like that. That was a good moment. But it seemed like Kira was kind of inconsistent within these two parts, because she was all pissy and supporting the Maquis in part 1, and now she was like very actively working against the Maquis and thinking that they suck. So I don't know. I thought that they weren't very clear on her stance, and I don't know. Like, I don't think just because I do kind of get that she hates Cardassains so much that she would relate to anyone who is fighting against them, but still, I don't know. It seemed like they were a bit inconsistent with her portrayal. I do also have to mention another really nice part of this episode was when Dukat, after Sisko rescued Dukat, and Dukat's like, oh, why aren't the Cardassians storming the station? And Sisko's like, oh, we got a visit from Legate Parn. It's like, oh, I'm sure he had a few choice words to stick up for me. And it's like, actually, he said that you were guilty of of running the weapons, and if the Maquis didn't kill you, he would kill you. After a comforting trial, I'm sure. Which is because they had the conversation before where Dukat was explaining the trial system, which I suppose makes sense for a fascist dictatorship society like the Cardassian Union, but I didn't need to see a whole episode about it, because this is when they first mention it, and then they make a whole episode about it at the end of the season with Tribunal, and I really don't like that episode. And I'll get more to that when I review that episode. But yeah, I was kind of iffy on this thing, but I did like that line because it kind of reminded me of Civil Defense when Dukat came on board as being all swaggering and arrogant, but he tried to leave and the Cardassian program shot him down, and he was stuck on the station that was about to self-destruct with everyone else, and he just like this is kind of like a lesser version of that, when he was being all arrogant. Oh, I'm sure the Cardassians had a few choice words. Actually, they said they were going to murder you after, I'm sure, what would be a comforting trial. And, what's also important is that Dukat just said when Sisko was challenging him on the trial system, Dukat's like, and Sisko asked, what if you're wrong? And Gul Dukat's like, we're never wrong. And right before he says, he's like, set up for, they want to kill you. So you're never wrong, huh? I guess that means you're a traitor and you deserve to die. So that was a nice moment when he had that other look in his face when Sisko revealed that. He was like, oh, well, oopsie. That was great. But they never really explained how Dukat got back into favor with the Cardassian Central Command. If they're the ones who were smuggling weapons, he stopped them from doing that. Why are they not trying to execute him? I don't know. Anyway, I don't really like Sisko and the others working with Dukat. I think he works better as a villain, and he's a freaking mass murderer, guilty of genocide, work camps and whatnot. He's not your fucking friend. He shouldn't be an ally ever. He should always be an enemy, but that's just my humble opinion. So that might also have something to do with why I don't like this episode that much. Not as much as everyone else does. Anyway, okay, so I guess I gotta finally talk about, I've been kind of pushing this off, I gotta talk about the politics involved with the Maquis and the demilitarized zone. Because I remember, decades ago hearing that this was kind of an analogy for Israel-Palestine. Now, I didn't really know anything about that whole history or conflict or anything, but due to current events, I've actually learned a lot about it. I've been watching lots of videos and studying up on the history and hearing from both sides and hearing all the different perspectives and all the historical accounts of that particular conflict. And after learning all that, I came to the conclusion that I don't think so. I don't think it's really, to me, it doesn't seem like a good analogy or parallel to that situation. And when I cover this episode, I will get to, I think, the episode that does actually touch on this situation is the Next Generation episode, Ensign Rowe. Now, that's very confusing because they make the analogy of Bajorans being more like Palestinians. Not necessarily. Cardassians are a very loose analogy to Israelis. It's not a one-to-one. But it's Bajorans in that episode are Palestinians. But that's only in the episode Ensign Rowe, which is the first appearance of the Bajorans. And unlike the Maquis, when they made that episode, they didn't realize that they were going to make an entire show based off of the Bajorans. So they were written as a one-off alien. Well, Ensign Rowe would become a recurring character, but other than that, they were a one-off alien. And so, but when Deep Space Nine came along, they absolutely changed that analogy so that the Bajorans were modeled off of the Jewish during the Holocaust, and the Cardassians were Nazis. So that's why when I say in Ensign Rowe that the Bajorans portrayed as Palestinians, that might seem very off to most people because they're used to the portrayal of Deep Space Nine, where the Bajorans are more the Jewish people and the Cardassians are more space Nazis. They're the Nazis, which is not the original analogy. So they completely changed the analogy for Deep Space Nine. So you have to keep that in mind when I mention that about Ensign Rowe. I'm only talking about that episode, not the portrayal of Bajorans going forward. Going forward, they're definitely not the Palestinians. They completely flipped the analogy. But as I said, I'll get to that more when I cover Ensign Rowe. The point is, that episode was a better analogy for that conflict. This episode, I just don't really think it fits. Not that I purport to be an expert on that particular topic, but it doesn't. Now, there is one aspect that does fit, which I definitely see. And it's not so much that specific conflict, although the specific conflict is affected by it, but it's more of the broader topic of what happened at the end of World War I when the Ottoman Empire was conquered by the Western forces. The Ottoman Empire controlled most of what is referred to as the Middle East, and it had all these different pockets of ethnicities and different religions living in different, clumps and sections, and the Ottoman Empire sort of controlled all of it, and so they kind of lived together in peace. However, when that empire fell, the Western powers, the UN, or no, the UN was World War II. I'm sorry. Yeah, I never purported to be a historian expert, but anyway, the Western powers just made up arbitrary borders, which created a lot of issues, a lot of wars, and a lot of fighting. Not just the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but many other conflicts. Iraq, Iran, and a lot of the Syria, like all those countries were made up by the Western powers after World War One. And the problem with the drawing out arbitrary borders, and I did watch a video that did say how they made the decision on the borders, but I don't remember it enough to repeat it for you, but you probably know. Point is, the borders separated those different groups of ethnicities and religious groups, and so it created minorities in particular countries. This particular religion was cut off from that religion in this country. It separated, gathered like a clump of the one religion into 3 different countries, and then they were repressed by the majority of religion in other in that same country, and so it created a lot of conflicts. And so they kind of fucked up by drawing these arbitrary borders that separated people from what they used to consider their homes. And there was people who had to be displaced or moved. Particularly, I guess, we get to the whole Israeli-Palestinian thing. And which, was exacerbated after World War II. So I guess that part of it applies to the Maquis, because the whole thing about the demilitarized zone, about Cardassian planets getting put in Federation space and Federation planets getting put in Cardassian space, and them refusing to leave, and so then this creates a conflict because you have the the Cardassains now harassing the Federation minorities that are in their space, and then wanting to reconquer that or whatever, and it creates conflict. So that's similar to that. So that part of it is, but the rest of it isn't. So I don't really, I think that analogy fits better for Insimer than it does for the Maquis. But that aspect of it does work, I suppose. Now, I've heard some arguments about the Maquis because of the fact that they live in a post-scarcity society of the Federation, that why don't they that makes it different than the situation in the Middle East, because the situation in the Middle East, particularly with Palestinians, they don't really have any option. They don't have nowhere to go. They would be refugees. They wouldn't have any resources. They have no homes. Whereas the Maquis, or the colonists, the Federation colonists who are in Cardassian space, they're in a post-scarcity society, so they could immediately go to another planet. They would immediately have food. They would immediately have home. They would immediately have everything that they need. The only thing that would be different was that they would be on a different planet than the one that they were on. So therefore, they would have to give up their homes. Now, this gets into the other forcing your home, like forcing this old man who refuses to sell his home when they're trying to build an apartment complex or whatnot, or a shopping mall. It gets into that kind of situation. And in that case, I have less, I'm sorry, call me, heartless, but I have less sympathy. Not saying I have no sympathy, but I have less sympathy than, a refugee. He's being forced by violence, forcibly removed from their home, and they have absolutely nowhere to go. Where this is similar to the episode Progress in Season 1 with Voyager, DS9 Season 1, where the Bajoran refused to leave his home because he was a cranky old man who I wish Kira just would have bitch slapped and throw him in the runabout. Anyway, I'll get to that episode when I get to that. But anyway, so I would feel sympathy for the Federation colonists, because it sucks that you have to leave your home, but it's not the same thing as being a poor refugee being forced into scary, which again, it was the analogy they made in that episode in some row. But here, they're part of the Federation. Post-scarcity society. Just move to another fucking world. You'll have a home. You'll have infinite amount of resources, food, everything you want. Find another home. Find the world with a better climate. Now, I get this is our home and we want to fight for it. But that makes their calls a lot more... Like, for example, the episode Journey's End did touch on this with the Native Americans because they have a spiritual attachment to their new world. And the Federation forcing them to move because of the treaty sucks. And I get that. But their solution was, oh, well, we'll just stay in Cardassian space. Well, it turns out that's not actually working out very well for them. The Cardassians are killing them. Now, so their problem is not the Federation trying to force them to move because of treaties that they made that had nothing to do with them. Their problem is Cardassians saying this is our land and trying to fucking force and killing them while they take it. And so, yeah, sure, you can fight back, but become terrorists, become outlaws, to blow up ships and kill tons of people and go against your own people, the Federation and Starfleet, and try to separate from them, and at the risk of being arrested by your own people and then killed by the other people and labeled as terrorists and having to kill other people. I'm sorry, but it doesn't seem like a good enough reason to do it. You can create a new home that's just as good as your home. I know it sucks, and I'm not saying it's ideal, and maybe a fucking... Starfleet's fault for forcing the move, and they could continue to protest. Do it from safety when you're not being killed by a bunch of fucking evil Cardassians. Yeah, and this brings up another topic, though, because I had a friend in high school. I remember when these episodes were coming out, who also liked Star Trek, and he was so pro Maquis. Like, he was 1,000%, he's like the Maquis are 1,000% correct. Like, in the episode For the Cause, when Eddington had the whole speech about how the Federation's just as bad as the Borg, which, by the way, Ira Stephen Bear, his fingertips on that one, too. Anyway, he 100% agreed with Eddington. He thought the Maquis were 100% in the right. I remember playing a Star Trek role-playing game with him, too, where he was a Maquis soldier, and he was like killing this Cardassian and stopping him and like fucking like being brutal. I'm like, all right, calm down. But no, I disagree with that. I think that the Maquis did not have to resort, I don't really buy that seasoned Starfleet officers like Cal Hudson or Chakotay would buy into that they would, because Cal Hudson in this episode in particular, Sisko points out, we can make peace right now. We can do a settlement, and we can stop the infighting, and everyone would live in peace. You get to even stay in your home. You don't have to go anywhere. We can make peace happen. And Cal Hudson's like, nah, fuck that. It's too late for that. They've attacked us, so we have to attack them back. I think that kind of pettiness would be that's why, again, I don't buy Cal Hudson as a character, by the way, because that kind of pettiness, I think, would be beyond him. So, yeah. I think the Maquis are wrong. Particularly how they're portrayed in this episode. I don't buy them, and I don't buy that they're this stupid, and I don't buy that they're this ineffective. So a lot of stuff bothers me about this episode, in other words. Anyway, I'd like to go ahead and thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I am very thankful for everyone's support. So, as soon as I bring it up, I'm just going to give a quick shout out to everyone that supports me on Patreon. So we have Antarius, Tetson, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelesio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so very much for your support. So we got a few Patreon comments. on this video. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, the Maquis, more like the pilot vehicle for the introduction of Star Trek Voyager setting. Indeed, but that, yeah, always seems weird to me. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, I am seriously shocked that most people, including my parents and sisters, call this one of the best episodes in the show and the singular best Maquis episode in Star Trek. I think this episode is nowhere near as good as Preemptive Strike. For that, to me, is the best Maquis episode, period. Also, this episode is nowhere near as good as Duet or Whispers. This is definitely one of the most overrated episodes in Trek. Sorry about the rant, but all that aside, it's a good, decent episode, just not an amazing one. I don't like the portrayal of Dukat as helpful ally and that the Cardassains are the good guys and the Maquis are bad. The concept to me was very mishandled. Instead of portraying both parties as morally gray and having both perspective valid points, to me it didn't achieve that, and thus it didn't grab me for as much as most people. So I like I said, I like it, but it's not great, so my rating is a 7 out of 10. Yeah, I agree with you almost entirely. Like, we're so on the same page almost always. Totally agree with you about Preemptive Strike. That's easily the best Maquis episode and way better than this one. Duet and Whispers, also way better than this one, as I already mentioned. But the one thing I might take slight issue with is that the Maquis and the Cardassains were portrayed as good and the Maquis was portrayed as bad. I think that they were, in fact, both portrayed as morally gray. However, the Maquis were portrayed as ineffective and sucky, where the Cardassains were portrayed as more effective and badass. And that I really didn't like. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I always liked the Maquis. Even part 2 was kind of a letdown overall. It was still a strong story arc. It's weird that Deep Space Nine had more Maquis episodes than Voyager did, yet another story arc that Voyager fucked up, that is Irish slang for fuck. Yeah, I got that. But I will talk about that sometime in maybe late 2025. Quark really shines in the Maquis and wins the discussion with the Vulcan about logic. We also learned that the Central Command dislikes Dukat, but we discussed that in the episode Waltz, coming in the summer of 2025. I really wished Gol-Evek appeared in more episodes of Deep Space Nine. He only appeared in 2 other episodes. My rating is 8 times Quark asks Sakona to dance on the table, and then we can discuss it over dinner. That is, we can plan the business meeting to coincide when you think you might get hungry, out of 10. P.S. Have you reviewed Preemptive Strike before? I have not reviewed Preemptive Strike. I kept trying to slip it into my Patreon polls, but you guys didn't go for it. I never won a Patreon poll. I kept this one episode. There's some episodes that because I choose the episodes for the Patreon polls, which I don't do anymore. I used to do before I started going in order. And I slipped in Preemptive Strike like 3 or 4 times, but you guys never went for it. So I never did it. I did do a live discussion, not live, but a pre-recorded discussion with Wes from Pensky File over on his channel. So you can check out Pensky File for Preemptive Strike, and I think it was Revisit or whatever, and there'll be me. I'll be there talking about Preemptive Strike with Wes. I did that like 3 or 4 years ago, I think, and I like that episode a lot more than he did. In fact, I was the guest, and he had me choose the episode, and that's the episode I chose that I wanted to talk about. But I haven't reviewed it myself yet. I'm waiting until I get there. And by the way, I think 2025 is probably a bit optimistic, because you have to remember that I'm going to go in air date order, so I'm not going to do all of Next Gen and then all of Deep Space Nine and then all of Voyager. I'm going to start Deep Space Nine during season 6 of TNG, and I'm going to start Voyager during season 3 of DS9, so therefore I'm going to be doing DS9 and Voyager side by side, so it's probably going to be later before I get to season 6 of DS9. It's going to be maybe 2026. God, I'm cringing. It's really going to take me this long to get through this. I don't know. Maybe I'll go faster. I don't know, but geez. Anyway, I don't know. I still think it might be a little bit optimistic, but we'll see. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, there are parts of the Maquis that I liked, including the introduction of uneasy adversaries Sisko and Dukat working together, the Vulcan Maquis agent who Quark is trying to impress, and a general introduction of the Maquis. As for Sisko's mentor turned rival, as the only time we ever hear from him again is from Eddington, who I guess took over and revealed that Hudson had passed away. I felt a bit cheated as I wanted more between Sisko and the mentor. As is watching in reruns, I do not care as much, especially the definite rival issue Sisko has with Eddington that truly rocks. Also, if I can be blunt, it seemed too stretched out as a two-parter. I'd rather watch TNG's Preemptive Strike as the ultimate Maquis intro, which I consider a much more superior episode, as it involved Roland, an already known character, and the audience appreciates, that the audience truly appreciates. Because of all this, in the past I gave it an 8. I will bring it down to a 7. More appearances I wish there were than we got, and especially since her last was not real, of Badmiral Nechayev out of 10. Especially since, unlike others, she can't really be a Badmiral. Yeah, she's just an Asmiral. That's what I would call her. An Asmiral, like an asshole admiral. I just thought of that. But anyway, I'm sure not the only one. Yeah, you guys gotta slim it down with your something out of 10, because you're doing like 3 sentences out of it before you get to the 10 out of 10 part. Anyway, no, you do you. You do what you like. But yeah, another one agrees. Preemptive Strike is the superior episode, which it absolutely 100% is. That was the good Maquis episode. That made me identify more with the Maquis and relate more with them. They're the Bing pansies I didn't like. And yeah, Sisko's rival or friend turned rival, didn't buy him either. They not only did they need to do more after, they needed to do more before. I was kind of okay with them killing him off screen, because they never really did good with this character in the first place. Anyway, I just wish they would have handled Eddington becoming the leader of the Maquis better, because that just came out of nowhere. He was a spy working for the Maquis. Next thing you know, he's the leader of the Maquis. When the fuck did that happen? Off screen. Anyway, sorry. So, next comment is from Brandon Neilhouse, who says, this should really only be one episode. Delete the filler. First, Dax and Kira bickering about who's going on a date with who. We can't see Captain Baudet's skull, so who gives a rat's arse? Needless fluff, I say. No matter how many times I watch this two-parter, I always think the guy in the Federation uniform who sabotages the Bach-Nor is Eddington. It does kind of look like him. And I'm not sure which is a worse fate for him, getting tortured to death by Cardassain interrogators or abducted by a pair of Teletubbies. They do look like Teletubbies. Why is a Vulcan part of the Maquis? Oh, fuck it. There's a Vulcan in Red Squad too, so common sense has flown out the airlock. Cal Hudson's actor could be so much better, but he can't help being outshined by Mark Alamo. But it doesn't matter, because Cal Hudson does a blackfish in a later episode. that's dying off screen, I suppose. That's what it means, referring to black shit fish from Game of Thrones, if you don't get the reference. Anyway, I'm generally amused by Quark trying to out-reason Sakona in holding cell, and oh joy, it's Admiral Bitchface. Ducat is totally correct. The Maquis aren't ruthless enough. I can only give these episodes 5 failed mind melds out of 10. Yeah, I don't buy the failed mind meld thing. We protect ourselves. Bullshit. You can't do that. Fucking Cardassain idiots. Anyway, I suppose Betazoids can't reach Ferengi, so maybe Cardassains are immune. Like, he trained himself to be immune from... Get the fuck out of here. I'm sorry. I'm getting caught up on that. And also, on the topic of Vulcans, it's not so much that I think they would be too smart or better to join the Maquis. It's more of, I think if they did join the Maquis, they would be more fucking badass than this pansy seen in this episode. But that's just me. So anyway, my rating for the Maquis, parts 1 and 2, out of 10, is going to be a 6 good, which I think, I was thinking of giving it a 7, but the more I talked about its flaws, the more I realized it's a 6. And I don't know, I do kind of agree with Brandon that this could be one part. I think there was a lot of filler in this episode, and there's just... Yeah, I mean, as I said, Deep Space Nine is my favorite show, despite the fact that Ira Steven Behr was the showrunner. So I don't always, it's not like I think he's a terrible writer. It's not that I always hate what he does, but I don't like when he inserts his distaste for Roddenberry's vision, because I like Roddenberry's vision. I think he's wrong about it. And when he tries to portray the Federation negatively, and I think he did that too much in this episode. And yeah, Ducat's, I don't know, a lot of the Ducat stuff I wasn't a huge fan of. But, I'm not going to say it's a bad episode. It was still interesting enough. The concept of the Maquis was interesting. And as I said, there was some Sisko moments that I really liked in this episode, like him yelling at Kira. And yeah, the opening the door, that was cool. I can't get over that. And yeah, so the episode was okay. So the 6 is like my okay. It was fine. It's just, I wouldn't consider this a great episode. And so if people think this is one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, then yeah, I would agree that they're overrating it a lot. I don't think they're that good. Anyway, that is it for my review of the Maquis. So, let's just see, coming up on my channel, let's see. So we got Thursday will be my review for the Voyager poll winner, which is author. Saturday will be my the winner for the Enterprise poll, which is Civilization. And then Monday, I'm doing a video essay. How about that? Doing a video essay entitled "The Myth of Fan Entitlement and Why It's Dangerous." I didn't mean to say entitled, and then I said entitlement. That was repetitive. But anyway, the myth of fan entitlement and why it's dangerous, where I sort of tackle the critique of fan entitlement in fandoms of fans being entitled. I don't think that's accurate, and I will make a whole essay about that. How about that? And then on Wednesday, we'll finally return to TNG with Season 4. Finally begin Season 4 of TNG. But over on Patreon for my Patreon supporters, as I will revisit my review for the episode Family. So that will be what's coming up on my channel. So be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek and many other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.